Hi there, guys. My name's Tiffany, and today I want to talk to you about the 10 items that I search for while I'm out thrifting. Um, I love vintage clothes. I love kind of vintage everything, really. And so I want to help you learn how to find and source more vintage. Depending on if you're a collector or if you're a reseller. Um, I have some tips and tricks that I like to talk about, and maybe help you in your journey of, reselling or collecting, find some more things. And, like vintage and antiques is like one of those things that you can never stop learning about. Nobody knows the most about it or one item. There are so many things. How could you know it all? So these are just the things that I look for. These are my top 10 items that I look for while I'm outsourcing. And I'm going to just jump right in. So, and this is not in any order of importance at all, because when you're sourcing, it really depends on where you're at and what's being donated or what's being sold. Um, and all of those factors decipher if you're going to be able to find vintage that day or not, because it's getting harder and harder to find. And some places actually like don't even see the value in it. They just think that they're, old throwaway clothes, and they actually throw them away. And they never make it out to the sales floor. So while you're out thrifting and doing your thing, you're out shopping, um, these are the things that I look for. So the first thing that I always look for is I look for designer tags. And vintage designer tags are hard to find because they're out there, but people understand the value of designer items, because there's so many like consignment shops and you hear the name over and over and over again. um, it's hard to find them, but doesn't mean that they're not out there. I found a piece of scaparelli the other day. It's a box, but it's still scaparelli, and she's a great designer in my opinion, and so I was thrilled to find it. And so when you're searching, looking at the tags is like a number one clue. I mean, sometimes it could be style, or maybe they might even have a signature on the fabric, which is like, if you find something that's got signed fabric, whatever the name is, I would suggest to buy it because it will be a designer and a collectible piece. Um, and it's just fun. That's part of the thrill of the hunt, is like, what am I going to find today? So I really like to wear vintage dresses. I like to wear them, and so I like to look for them. And so one of the first places that I always go is over to the dress department. And you can really spot a vintage fabric in comparison to the modern fabrics now. The textiles just have a different look, and they do try to like copy vintage everything all the time now, but it's just not quite the same. So I definitely always look for dresses. Number three is I look for men's shirts. I kind of skip around the thrift store a little bit. It just depends on like what area I'm in. But if I'm over in the men's department, I always look at men's shirts. Um, Men don't have a lot of fashion choices like women do. There's just like not as much stuff. And generally the men's department is always smaller in a thrift or a, not necessarily store at the mall, but it's a little bit easier to get through. So I always look for men's shirts, button ups, flannels, or t-shirts, and those are three items that I really look for, because like a men's vintage flannel, if you can find some designer flannels like a Pendleton, or even if you can find some of the 80s and 90s acrylics or the old vintage wool like you can really tell a vintage flannel when you see it, because usually, number one, the fabric looks different, the pattern looks different, and the feel of it, the textile feel, you're like, wow, it could be really itchy, and that is real vintage wool. It's heavy and it's itchy. And so I'm always looking for, let's see, men's shirts. And since like the men's department is smaller, I also look at jeans. And so I'm always looking for those vintage Biggie Levi's, or some uh, Mavericks. I was going to say Machiavelli, but that's the wrong thing. And sometimes Wranglers, vintage Wranglers are, they're really good. Printed, and so they have cool fabrics, cool looks to them, like parrots and Hawaiian mountains and hula girls, and so it's a really fun thing to look for. And I also always look for vintage t-shirts. Like, oh, vintage t-shirts are definitely one of my jams. I can go from pretty much any vintage t-shirts. People are really looking for like vintage designer, sport, like a Champion with a blue bar, or vintage Harley Davidson. Like if you can find an old hog shirt with a literal hog on it, one of the piggies on it, that's vintage gold. But there's also a lot of shirts that you can just find when you're in the t-shirt department. You can find concert shirts. You can find events like, like runs, and like, climbing shirts. You can find old vintage designer. I've found, like, not recently, but I've definitely found some vintage, like Banana Republic shirts with the pockets on the front. And they actually remade them, but they were making those in the 80s, and they were like the vintage safari shirts, and they were so cool because the graphics on them is like when Banana Republic like used to actually like be about the safari life. And so that's why vintage t-shirts are fun. They're soft, they're threadbare. Some of them are see-through. I have some t-shirts that are so see-through. And the way that they get that way is just by use. And that's a whole lot cooler to me and to anybody who might be looking to buy that or to wear it. It's earned its stripes. Like, they didn't just pour chemicals on it to make it threadbare and look like beat up. Like, it really got beat up. And so that kind of makes hunting for vintage t-shirts, usually they're all in the men's department, sometimes in women's, but not usually. Like a 50-50 shirt would be over in the men's. Okay, also I think I'm on number four. Coats and jackets. Like, this is a seasonal item, and since we're going into fall right now, the stores are inundated with rows of jackets and coats and long coats and light coats, and all the coats are out. And so I find that a vintage coat, depending on what you're finding, has a really good resale value, because people, live in different parts of the world and the United States, and it gets cold, and so you want to have something that's like fashion and function. And man, if you're lucky, you can find vintage wool, sometimes vintage cashmere, you can find fur coats. There's a lot of different options, which I definitely like coats. And I also like to look at the men's coats and the menswear, because not everything's perfect at the thrift, or if you're sourcing. Like, people make messes and they move things, and so if you're out and you're looking for that like fabric, sorry, I'm itchy. If you're looking for something that is a heavier piece, when you touch the textile, that's going to tell you a lot. You can tell if it's an acrylic, if it's a wool, if it's cotton. Use your spidey senses and you'll find some good stuff. And patterns too, like the vintage patterns, kind of like my dress, stick out like a sore thumb. Everything else that's like modern or maybe a remake probably doesn't have the same type of pattern as a vintage coat or a jacket would. Okay, so number 5, since we're in fall, sweaters. It's almost sweater season and people love over the top sweaters. Sweaters that have that are knit, that have like weird things knit in it, like scenes, crazy cat lady. I just recently found a knit sweater that is like a bus scene, like for a little kid. Like I feel like the bus driver maybe wore this sweater, but I bought it because of the pattern. Like the pattern on it is so over the top and weird. They try to make modern ones like it, but it just doesn't have the same authentic look to it. And like vintage sweaters, you can find cashmere, you can find acrylic, you can find knits, things with patterns, so many different styles, vests, cardigans, pullovers. I mean, sweaters are universal, and so I always look for them, especially now because there's going to be like, it's sweater season, so there's going to be a lot of sweaters out. And man, people will pay for sweaters because it's a statement piece. You can't get a modern sweater that looks as cool as a vintage one, in my opinion, depending on, you know, what type of sweater it is. I like the vintage ones because they look vintage. Okay, let's see. Oh, number 6. So anything to cover up the old legs. Pants, shorts, skirts. I'm always, well, I kind of avoid the pants sometimes. I like jeans, but pants I get a little bit overwhelmed. And the way that you just stay focused and not get overwhelmed is to look at the patterns. And a vintage pattern will jump out at you if you just feel like kind of scanning it and not getting too in depth into digging and sorting through the racks. Look for patterns. Or if you are going through and you're looking for sizes and you're looking for styles, you know, you just got to kind of dive in head first and like take a couple deep breaths and drink some coffee and just do it. That's the only way you can find pants and skirts. Is it takes a little bit longer, but there are gems hidden in the racks. Oh, number 8, I always look for accessories, purses, shoes, bags, anything that you can add on, I like. And I also try to always look for like messenger bags for laptops, because those are universal, and like the old vintage ones and the old vintage suitcases, I mean, just they're made out of real leather, and the leather is so fabulous. It makes our modern leather pieces kind of look not as awesome. It's usually tanned a little bit differently. It's worn, a lot more worn, or if it was never really carried, it might still have a new look to it. And then shoes, like I love to look for vintage boots and shoes, and they're getting harder and smaller to find. So, but they're out there and you just have to look. Vintage has a look, and a lot of things are copying vintage, and I get duped all the time. I spend, I would say, maybe almost half my time at the thrift thinking something's vintage until I pick it up and look at it. And until you actually pick it up and look at it, how are you going to know? You're not solving any vintage mysteries by just standing there and hoping it's going to just jump off the rack and jump into my arms. Yeah, vintage doesn't do that. It actually probably is avoiding you. It's like like trying to not stand out. It's trying to blend in. So you're the one who's got to like find it. So let's see. Accessories, purses, bags, shoes and boots. Oh, okay. So my last thing that I look for, and I look for these year round, are costumes. Costume season has a special place in my heart. I love costumes. I love playing dress up. When I had my vintage shop, one year I think I wore about like almost 20 costumes in the month of October. I mean, I was killing it with my costume game. And people love costumes. So if you think something might not be wearable, like for 364 days out of the year, well, maybe that one day a year is when somebody would want to buy it. You don't know. People buy dance costumes, they buy regular costumes, they buy full body costumes, like those like hoodie zip up, like, yeah, people are looking for costumes. People are looking for unusual and over the top items, and it might not even be a costume. It might just be something that's really in real life, and but somebody wants to wear it. So that's it. That's my top 10 items that I look for while I'm thrifting. And other things definitely jump in onto my list. I could probably make a list of 100 things. But I don't know. This is what I'm looking for. This is mostly it. This covers the thrift for me. There are definitely other facets and other things that they sell at the thrift store. But this is my top 10. This is what I find that I like to collect, I like to buy, I like to resell. And so I thank you for watching my channel and watching my video. And the next time I talk to you, I'm going to tell you a little bit more in depth about finding vintage clothes. So, I don't know. I think next time either we're going to talk a little bit about different eras to look for, or maybe we'll just focus on how to find a true piece of vintage. Because it's there. You just have to look for it. You probably skipped over 3 pieces of it last time you went out sourcing. But like I said, vintage is mysterious. It's not going to jump into your arms until you pull it off the rack. You've got to figure it out. So happy hunting. Thanks for watching, you guys. Please like and subscribe my channel, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.